Which round one edge rusher makes the most sense for the Dallas Cowboys? We'll discuss on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're taking a look at some edge rushers the Cowboys could select in round one. This is a fantastic edge rusher class. We know the Cowboys need one opposite of Micah Parsons. So let's look at the top three edge rushers outside of Abdul Carter, because unfortunately, the Cowboys won too many games to get Abdul Carter. But let's look at the next three according to the consensus board. Up first is Mykel Williams from Georgia. He is currently being drafted or currently being ranked at 10th overall. Landon, what did you see from Williams when you watched his tape?
You know, listen, I think let's preface this whole conversation by saying, again, that we are diving specifically into the realm of defensive ends that don't love, right? Like the kind of bigger type of guys. And what do you do with them?
They're harder to project.
Yeah, they are harder to project. And the two guys specifically that we're going to talk about today, I think are really right in the middle of that whole situation as well. So Mykel Williams, big dude, 6'5", 265 pounds. He's got a long, rangy body. Feels like, he uses his power in his hands and his length. Like he's very much a lever player. Mm-hmm. The first thing that comes to mind when you watch him is, first of all, he was a very highly rated recruit. I mean, I definitely remember him being recruited out of high school. And it feels like when you watch the 24 tape that he's playing out of position. And this is a situation that you see a lot with these Georgia defenders. I think we saw it with Travon Walker and some of these other folks where it's like they play them at these kind of 4-eye and then 5 techniques. And they attack the B gap a lot, and it doesn't make for an easy evaluation for what they're going to be like as a defensive end, which I think is what Mykel Williams will have to play. Because, I mean, that's the issue, is that he's 265 pounds, so he can't really be a full-time 3 technique. You don't really necessarily want him as like a 5 tech, though I think he can play that, obviously, like he did at Georgia full-time. But you still need to see him kind of pair those long arms and the pop in his hands with that athletic traits that we see that he has. Like you saw him at different times get on the outside in 23 and get to rush the passer that way. But really it felt like, and this is going to be a hot take a little bit, I think that Travon Walker and Mykel Williams being on the same team this year really hurt each other's draft stock, because I think that once they discovered how good Walker was as an outside pass rusher, they were committed to Williams, and they didn't want to take him off the field because, he's a highly, there was a promise made to a recruit. So they just put him in at this 4-eye spot, and then, left a lot of the outside pass rushing to Williams. You see, to Walker. You see Williams line up outside, occasionally at a 6 technique. But almost inevitably, every time he does, he ends up looping back inside to attack the B gap. So I don't know if if there's a situation where he just isn't quite bendy enough to come around the edge, and Georgia kind of figured that out and made adjustments.
He did deal with an ankle injury a lot in 2024, so that could be a factor in this as well.
He feels like I put in my notes, I put that I feel like he's a 2010s Belichick Patriots defender, right? Like he's this long levered, strong hands, not quite, a bursty athletic guy, but I honestly feel like you could play him at 3 technique all the way to 9, and he could play the run extremely well. My question is, what's your plan with this guy on pass rushing downs? Is he rushing from the B gap, Are you putting him outside? Does he have like all the pass rush moves you need, to kind of win that way? I didn't see a lot of opportunity for him to take the outside shoulder of a tackle and try to get around the edge and see if he has that in him. But I have to imagine that, you didn't see a ton of it in 2023 either. I think you saw it, in that that bowl game that was the Orange Bowl that they played. And I think that's all you've really seen of him kind of as a outside pass rusher. So I think people are basing his grade a lot on traits, which is fine, obviously. But I see a guy that I think is going to be a difficult projection. I think when you draft him, you're going to get a very high floor run defender who can play in multiple spots, and he's going to be very good in that spot. But I think you're going to have a very specific pass rush plan for this guy. And I have a feeling it may not be like as simple as, he reduces down into the B gap and rushes the pass as a 3 technique every time. He's going to have to rush the passer on the outside. And I just don't know how developed he is. Probably developed enough to get drafted, obviously. But I mean, you're talking about taking this guy potentially in the top half of the first round.
12. Yeah. So a couple of things. You mentioned the traits. We should at least mention why so many people like him. He's only 20 years old, and he played a lot as a freshman at Georgia at age 18. Pretty unbelievable. He's expected to have 35-inch arms, and he's going to run in the 4.5s, assuming that he's recovered from the ankle injury. His springtime last year was 4.57 at 6.042. 265 pounds. If you look at like the history of edge rushers that are over 260 and that run in the sub 4.6s, there's only like 4 or 5 of those guys out there. And actually, Travon Walker, a former teammate of his, is actually one of them. So it's funny that Georgia had these guys at the same time. I don't think he is as physically dominating as what Travon Walker was. I know Walker didn't put up big stats at Georgia, but neither did Mykel Williams. And that's the rub here. One of my notes for him is I wish his best tape is when he's just showing off his power. It's the speed to power. When he's trying to show off his athleticism, it rarely generates any pressure. It doesn't put any stress on the quarterback. We know he's athletic, but his best wins come with using his power. One of my fears is, Landon, is that these type of players usually don't start to produce until the NFL, until their second contract. And I think Chauncey Golston is like, I think Mykel Williams could be like the A+ version of Chauncey Golston, but we're even seeing this with Chauncey Golston. Like his best football came in the second half of year 4. I wonder with Mykel Williams, if you draft him at 12, 14, if you're just always wanting more, and by the time he ends his rookie contract, if you feel like, hey, we got to re-sign him because we've invested all this time into him, but not really see any of the fruits of the development yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very good chance that you get all that you want out of Mykel Williams, but it doesn't happen until after his rookie deal is already over, right? And so, I like I said, I think his best tape is when you see him using his length and his power in his hands to defend the run. As a pass rusher, he wins, I think, a lot because he's kind of relentless in the middle. He's got length to kind of keep the guards off him. And it feels like when he does produce, it's when somebody else is chasing the quarterback out of the pocket and he's like the guy there waiting in the middle of the pocket for the quarterback to run into and wrap up. I think as a role, as kind of a finisher in the middle of a defense, attacking like an A and B gap, I think he can do that, but I don't know that he's actually pushing the pocket when he does that. It's more just like he's good against running quarterbacks as preventing them from kind of sneaking out the front of the pocket.
So you mentioned that he feels very much like a Belichick defensive lineman. One of my notes is I compared him to Keon White, who is currently a Patriots defensive lineman that they drafted in 2023, who was 6'4", 280 pounds. The difference with White was a 25-year-old rookie and instantly came in the NFL and played well. I just wonder, like, if you're going to have to be a power player as a 20-year-old rookie in the NFL, like we've seen that even for guys that are incredibly strong, like Mozzie Smith, it takes several years to get up to NFL strength. And I guess that's my concern with Mykel Williams, because I don't think he's a bendy player yet. He certainly doesn't have a lot of pass rush moves. I think this is you drafting him and hoping by year 3, year 4, year 5, he becomes a dominant player because he's not one yet.
Yeah, and again, like I mean, even the opportunities. That's what's frustrating. Even watching him is even the opportunities where you did see him kind of line up. You're like, okay, we're gonna get to see him kind of take an outside shoulder, and oh, we'll see a bull, we'll see a ghost, we'll see something from this guy because I've heard he's an incredible athlete, but always inevitably it's just him kind of looping back inside. So he may have that in him, but they clearly aren't showing that off, which I think that's the other thing is that I think if he played for any other team, that would be incredibly suspect, right? Like that's like, oh, they're clearly hiding him. But it with Georgia, it really could be, hey, we have 12 other 5-star defensive players that we're trying to focus on. We want to get Williams on the field, but the only way to do that is to kind of stick him at this, blue collar position and have him work a guard like that. So it's tough because it's unknown, really.
All right, let's talk about Shamar Stewart, another unknown pass rusher from Texas A&M. We will get to him next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it makes every moment exciting. I love sitting on the couch, watching a couple games every night. Now, especially now that football season's over, basketball consumes a lot of my life. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are discussing some round 1 edge possibilities for Dallas. And let's talk about Shamar Stewart, Landon, who currently on the expert consensus board is 18th overall, but a wide range. We have some people ranking him inside the top 10. We have, including Dane Brugler. We have several ranking him outside the top 30 players. In case you aren't familiar with Shamar Stewart, at the Senior Bowl, measured in at 6'05", so 6'5", 281 pounds, is expected to run a 4.67 40-yard dash. I just went and double checked. Here is the list since 1999 of every edge rusher, Landon, over 275 pounds that runs a sub 4.7 40-yard dash. It's Mario Williams, Carlos Dunlap, Rashawn Gary. That is the entire list to show you how freaky he is.
Yeah, and that is definitely the truth, right? With him, you see it right away. He looks different than the other athletes around him, and to be clear, he's got at least 2, if not more than 2, other NFL bodies on that defensive line with him. But he still looks really different. 5-star recruit, not surprising, absolutely explosive and relentless. I saw him run down a Notre Dame running back who had a 10-yard head start on him. He's a speed to power player. He's got a bursty second gear. I think the bursty second gear actually is because of some footwork issues we'll discuss here in a second. His stutter bull, he has a stutter bull, but it almost looks like an accident. It almost looks like he falls into the guy and then he's like working around him a little bit. But his long arm is deadly as he can get low and then just drive a tackle up on his toes. He has a stab and swipe that works. His value in the run game is clearly visible. Like, he plays with a strong, wide base and can lock the edge down. He's a wrecking ball who disrupts. His ceiling is just absolutely through the roof. So the question is, why so little production, right? And I think you see some of the notes here on the pass rush side, right? Like, look at that run defense grade, 99th%. And you see that, like, it's so apparent on tape that he is just dominating every tackle that he's facing, just physical, can get around them, can just kind of have their way. I think he has a lot of pass rush moves, which was surprising when I went to go watch him. To me, his whole situation is a footwork problem, right? Like his issue is that, and I think guys like Trevor Sikkema, pointed out that he doesn't fire off his front leg, which makes him have an extra step in his pass rush plan, which is unnecessary. It's almost unnoticeable because he's so explosive that like it almost like he gets there on time or just a little bit late. But the truth of the matter is, if he went off his front leg, he could get around almost all of these tackles, maybe even untouched at times, because he's so explosive off the ball that like he's so explosive physically that I think if he just did things right with his footwork, he would get upfield a lot quicker. And then when he gets to the top of the arc, and frankly, this isn't even just like a bending the edge thing. Even when he's inside and he's rushing, it feels like he struggles to keep his feet when he's closing in on the quarterback. And I think that has that, plus the fact that he's playing with a group of other NFL players on that defensive line, is why he didn't have, I think, as many sacks as he did before. He led A&M in pressures. But I mean, I think I have it right here. It's like he only had 11 tackles for loss and 4 sacks in 3 seasons. Like that's just not enough production for a first round pick.
Well, not only that, Landon, and I tweeted this right before we came out for the show. If he goes in the first round, which he will, he'll have the lowest tackle for a loss production from a first round pick over the last 35 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like I said, when you watch him, I think you see it in the sense that, like, look, I've always been told, and I believe that disruption is production. Because I think that if you watch the tape, this dude is disrupting all the time. Like, I mean, he is getting into the backfield. He's affecting the play, or they're dedicating 3 blockers to him, right? So he is creating in some ways. I think the issue is finishing with him. And like I said, you've seen it with the other guys on the roster with him that are NFL players. Like, all it takes is like one, missed move or a slip of your foot, and one of these other guys is going to clean it up for you, right? So I think that there is some circumstance to what his lack of production. It still scares me because obviously you mentioned it. Historically, there's never been a player who's produced as little as him that would be in the first round. However, I don't watch this guy and see someone who is like just a good athlete or a big body. Like, he looks like he's going to make it in the NFL based on his tape. Like, even though the production doesn't look right and it's not what you need it to be, I feel like if you can correct a couple things, this dude could be an absolute superstar. But I think even without that, I imagine, for a team like Dallas specifically that like has a strong side end, like that wants that power end, like he's such a great fit for that position right away, at least as a run defender right away, that he's actually a lot safer pick than I think you would imagine somebody with that little production coming out of this position would be.
So we saw Travon Walker, his final year at Georgia, had 7.5 tackles for a loss in 13 games. And that was at the time the lowest tackle for a loss production per game we've ever seen from an edge rusher. Shamar Stewart's is worse than that. It's 6 tackles for a loss in 12 games this year. If he had even Travon Walker's production, we're probably talking about somebody that doesn't get outside the top 5 in this class. The reason that we're talking about him as an option at 12 is because he doesn't have the production, because generally these guys don't fall very far. If he runs in the 4.6s at 280 pounds, this is the Bill Parcells planet theory. There's only so many guys in the world that are this big, this strong, this fast, and you draft them high and teach them how to become NFL edge players. Between Mykel Williams, who has better production than Stewart, I like Stewart a lot more. He just seems way freakier to me. And there's also, I don't know how to quantify this like in my notes or anything, but he just seems a little crazy, which I think is actually kind of a good thing for an edge rusher. I need my guys to be like, crazy. That's the best way to say it. He is just a freak to me. And I think I would be willing to gamble on him at 12. Especially when you pair him with Micah Parsons. Those two together would be monsters for opposing offenses.
Yeah, I think in any other situation, right? Like the lack of production, there is a tweener nature of the situation too, right? Because he's so big and because of the lack of production at defensive end, there is a lot of talk and some folks about measuring him or looking at him as a defensive tackle. I don't think he can do it.
No.
I don't think he has the base to play defensive tackle full time.
So you do
Certainly,
that in third downs, but
yeah,
not
absolutely.
as a first and second down guy.
In
No.
fact, I'd love him as a reduced three technique,
Yeah.
just on some snaps. But yeah, as a full-time defensive tackle, I don't think that's his thing. I mean, I think for most teams, like they would look at Shamar Stewart and say, this isn't worth the risk, right? Because I don't know where I'm playing him. He doesn't quite have the production I need. I understand the athletic profile, but for the Cowboys, like considering what they are looking for as a strong side defensive end and considering who we have as Eberflus as our defensive coordinator, what he likes as strong side power defensive ends, this is exactly the kind of guy you want at that position. And if he hits, then suddenly you really got something on the defensive end spot.
The other thing that I'll say about Dallas specifically is that you have a GM that can literally never be fired, right? And Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones, right? Take chances on these kind of guys because, like, if it hits, now we're talking about building an actual defensive line that can go out and win you games single-handedly. Again, I don't generally, if I was running a team, I would probably stay away from these guys a little bit. For the Cowboys, it makes total sense to gamble on athletic freaks like this.
Yeah, and again, I think because he has a high floor as a run defender, and because you have some defensive ends kind of waiting in the wings that are young players that you like, I think you can afford to take this gamble because it's not going to be such a huge loss if he isn't immediately a great pass rusher, right? Like, or at least immediately a 10 sack guy or 8 sack guy, right? Because he could still be incredibly useful on first and second down and third downs. It's even if he's not, getting sacks, which he wasn't in A&M. You could still kind of reduce him down and rush him from the 3 technique like you were with D Law at points. And here's the other thing too, Marcus. Think about pairing this guy with D Law, like and having him learn underneath DeMarcus Lawrence. If D Law comes back, that would be a really, really incredible opportunity.
He reminds me a lot of Rashawn Gary in all the good ways. And I think you add Rashawn Gary to this defensive line. I think that would really, really help out. Let's talk about Mike Green, who is completely different than these the first 2 edge rushers we've talked about. We'll discuss his fit with Dallas next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Football season may be over, but basketball is in full swing, and there is no better way to stay in the game than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With PrizePicks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. This week, I'm looking at Jason Tatum for more than 29 points. He's been red hot this month. There's so many features about PrizePicks that I love, but one of my favorites is that you can set a lineup in less than 60 seconds. And when you win, you can get paid in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, I love all their weekly promos. Go check them out on the PrizePicks page. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's talk about Mike Green, the Marshall edge rusher who we saw at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
Right now, he's being ranked at 20th overall, but we've seen a steady increase in his value.
Yeah.
What did you think of his tape when you watched it?
Well, I mean, first of all, like we mentioned, absolutely dominated the Senior Bowl process. I mean, he had really good practices, especially the second and third days. And I think the big thing for him more than anything really was the weigh-in, like coming in and being over 6'3", over 250 pounds. Those, combining what you saw on tape, that's what he needed to be at to kind of be in striking distance of the first round, especially the kind of middle of the first round. So he's a has like the speed and flexibility to win around the edge consistently. He's a technique guy. Like he's a finesse guy. Even though he coils up and he can strike OTs with power when he comes out of his stance. But I mean, you see spins, swims. I saw a ghost move. I saw pull slides, some bull slips, speed to power. Like this guy uses a bunch of different techniques to kind of get around his blockers. He can run the arc. He can get underneath the table without losing speed. I think there are some issues that it's easy to see the things that like you want in a pass rusher in him, right? Like even against Ohio State, you saw him beating 4-star right tackles and with dip moves around the edge and winning with speed and power. So the physical aspect of it isn't so much a concern, or at least it wasn't in college. But I do worry about the fact that he seems a little bit linear. Like he's not great at changing direction. So I think even though he's kind of relentless at times, there are moments when I feel like if he loses momentum, or if an offensive tackle kind of stops his momentum, it's tough for him to like kind of change direction and then like try to reset and keep going. Like I think he can like kind of lose speed a little bit in a snap, not necessarily over the course of a game, just because he kind of doesn't have a plan after that. I think he's a good run player, but I don't know that like that's like something that he's elite at necessarily. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if he came into the league and started out almost kind of as a defensive pass rusher like early on, because I just wonder if, especially now that there's more emphasis on the run game, if some of the bigger offensive tackles aren't going to just have their way with him. I saw snaps against Ohio State where I can't remember the Ohio State's tight end's name, but that he was sealing him off like on a couple of different runs on the backside. And it's like, you can't really have that for a guy that's like, supposed to be a first round defensive end. You don't want
it's going to be a jump going from playing at Marshall to playing in the NFL. And that's why, like, I think with like Stewart and Williams playing in the SEC, they're just used to playing bigger, better tackles. Green's advanced numbers in terms of run defense are really good. 99th percentile, 88th percentile run stop. But again, take that a little bit with a grain of salt because of the competition.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, when you watch him too, it's like, I think it's not like it's hidden there. His game is pretty straightforward. I think it's about like one gapping. It's about trying to penetrate and disrupt, right? Like you're not trying to have him, two gap or hold the edge too much. Like it's about, this is a guy that's going to be, highly coveted by teams that are playing the run on the way to the pass. So I think that he's when I watched him the second time after going back from the Senior Bowl stuff, I had hoped that I would see a little bit more of a looser athlete than I did. I think perspective is such a big thing with looking at these guys, right? Like when you first approach him, he's this guy from Marshall who's like this small school guy, and you're like, oh, maybe he can make it into the first round. Oh, this guy's a sleeper. Then we get to the Senior Bowl, and it's like he has a great Senior Bowl and he shows out. And now I'm going back and looking at him like, okay, yeah, all right, now that we're looking at him as a first rounder, I don't know if he's quite as advanced where I need him to be as a run defender. I don't think he's quite the loose athlete who I think that you almost want in those kind of right defensive ends. Not that that's like, disqualifying. I just think that, late first round is probably an appropriate area to get this guy because I think he does some things rushing the passer very, very well, which is going to get him into the first round. I don't know that he's like, a perfect prospect by any stretch of the imagination. And he's going to need a little bit of time to kind of get fully developed in the NFL.
Yeah. I'm a little higher on Mike Green than you are, but I agree generally with what you're saying. Like he is a lot smaller than what the previous two guys are. Just came in, I think it was 254. But I think it's fair to assume he put on a little bit of weight at the Senior Bowl. Sure. I think he probably plays at like 245, which is fine. Micah Parsons plays at 245. Yeah. He might be the best edge rusher in the league. My guess is as he grows into his NFL body, he's probably going to play around 250 pounds, which is fine. We've seen plenty of smaller edge rushers in the NFL. But one of the things I like about him is incredibly productive. He is the most productive edge player in this class. 23 tackles for a loss, 17 sacks during his sophomore season. The other thing I like about him is usually when you have these small school guys, they have like 3,000 career snaps under their belt, and they're coming in with just a lot of experience. That's not the case for him. He's got just over 1,000 career snaps. He is incredibly raw, but I also kind of like that. Like, you're getting somebody who was winning against some good competition, not only against the schools that Marshall plays, but against Ohio State, because he's an awesome athlete. He's going to run in the 4.5s at 250 pounds. I do think there's a lot of work that needs to be done with his footwork. You do see him bending around the edge, but he's not necessarily somebody that's going to be able to outstep offensive tackles the way that Micah Parsons does. But the problem that I have, like for Dallas, is that I have a hard time believing that they're going to want to play another sub 255 pound edge opposite of Micah Parsons. And that's
especially
where
this defense, right?
Especially in this defense. Let's say they bring back Osa Odigizua, you're already smaller at 3 technique. I think Green's a really, really good player. I think he's a top 15 player in this class. I don't think he's the best fit for Dallas at 12.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that, when you have a Micah Parsons, like it's tough to kind of play with 2 guys that are potentially under 255, definitely under 255 pounds. But and you mentioned it, like you're already at a spot where you're potentially light. You're moving to a defense that, prioritizes full size 4-3 defensive ends more than the kind of just speed guys. So I think, obviously you make exceptions for the best defensive player in all of football, but you can't make exceptions at the other spots. You actually have to kind of compensate for the exception that you've made for Micah. You need a bigger defensive end. And I think at the very least, like, you're not willing to spend a first rounder on this kind of guy, because I think at this point, Mike Green's role as a defensive pass rusher early on, it's not very useful for a team that already has a Micah Parsons, and just not going to get a lot of opportunity to see these guys on the field a ton at the same time. I
do think there are some edge guys that are like Mike Green in the 2nd and 3rd round. Like, if you want to just get a designated pass rusher that can do 90% of what Mike Green can do, I think those guys are available. But at 12 for Dallas, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. But for other teams at 11 or 13 or 14, I can see how you could justify him with that selection. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Make sure you check out our show on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you right back here on Monday.